The Cold War, often remembered for its intense political tension, military standoffs, and espionage, also had a less visible, but equally impactful battlefield: global finance. While the world's superpowers, namely the United States and the Soviet Union, were involved in a game of brinkmanship on the military front, the financial front was equally as complex. The Cold War wasn't just about soldiers and spies. It was about nations seeking control over economic influence, hidden financial pacts, and leveraging power in ways that would shape the world for decades to come. Have you ever wondered why the US dollar is considered the world's dominant currency? Or how China and the Soviet Union navigated the global financial system while at odds with the West? What's the real story behind the financial deals that were often made in secrecy, with no public knowledge? This is the untold narrative that goes beyond Bretton Woods and uncovers how secret financial pacts defined the course of the Cold War. In 1944, amidst the chaos of World War II, Allied nations convened at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. The goal was to create a stable global financial system that could help rebuild war-torn economies and foster international cooperation. The outcome was the Bretton Woods system, a structure that included the establishment of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank. This framework was revolutionary, aiming to stabilize currencies, regulate trade, and ultimately create a financial system that would prevent another global depression. At the heart of this new financial order was the US dollar, pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The US, emerging as the world's economic leader, was positioned to control global finance. However, Bretton Woods wasn't just about economic cooperation, it was a geopolitical move that put the US at the helm of world trade and finance. The system was crafted to protect the economic interests of the Western world, especially the United States, which would play a pivotal role in shaping the future global financial landscape. But Bretton Woods was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, secret financial pacts began to form, many of which would help to define the Cold War, establishing long-term economic dependencies between nations and consolidating American economic power. While the Bretton Woods system created a framework for international monetary exchange, another covert system was already taking shape in the Middle East. One of the most powerful and hidden financial pacts of the Cold War was the creation of the petrodollar system. In exchange for military protection and economic aid, the U.S. brokered agreements with oil-producing nations, notably Saudi Arabia, to ensure that all oil transactions would be priced in U.S. dollars. This was no mere coincidence. The U.S. needed a stable and powerful currency, and oil was the perfect tool to keep the dollar in demand across the globe. By ensuring that oil was traded exclusively in U.S. dollars, the U.S. created an artificial demand for its currency. This financial arrangement, unbeknownst to much of the public, meant that oil-exporting nations had to accumulate U.S. dollars for their oil exports, further cementing the U.S. dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, became the key player in this system. In return for its allegiance, the U.S. provided the kingdom with advanced military equipment, political backing, and access to American technology. The petrodollar system was an economic and geopolitical triumph for the United States, providing the dollar with an unparalleled global reach. However, this secret pact wasn't just about economics, it was about control. The U.S. was able to maintain its position as the world's dominant financial power by using oil, the most valuable commodity on the planet, as a tool to ensure that the dollar would be in constant demand. While the U.S. worked to cement the dollar's global dominance, the Soviet Union and China took very different approaches. Both nations, ideologically opposed to Western capitalism, sought to create alternative financial systems that would shield them from Western influence. The Soviet Union, despite being excluded from Bretton Woods institutions, set out to create its own financial network. Through Comecon, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, the USSR tried to offer its allies in Eastern Europe favorable trade agreements, focusing on central planning and state-controlled economies. Comecon was designed to be a counter to the capitalist financial system, offering Eastern Bloc nations an alternative to the IMF and the World Bank. However, this economic system was inefficient and ultimately unsustainable. The Soviet Union's financial system was based on central planning, meaning decisions were made by a few powerful leaders in the Kremlin, with little room for market forces or competition. This made the system rigid and prone to stagnation, especially as the global economy grew more interconnected and dynamic. On the other hand, China, after the 1949 revolution, initially kept itself isolated from the global financial system. But over the decades, China began to assert itself as an economic power. Despite being excluded from Bretton Woods institutions, China still managed to foster financial relations with developing nations, offering economic aid and loans. These financial pacts were part of China's broader strategy to expand its sphere of influence, particularly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, regions that were crucial in the global power struggle of the Cold War. While the US and the USSR were engaged in military and ideological warfare, a significant portion of the Cold War played out in the form of proxy wars. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, these wars were often financed through covert financial pacts that involved the transfer of arms, economic aid, and loans. Both superpowers used financial means to fund conflicts, influence political regimes, and maintain their global influence. The US, for example, used its influence over the World Bank and the IMF to provide loans to countries that adhered to Western ideologies. These loans were often tied to political conditions, with the US seeking to install governments that would align with capitalist values and resist communist influence. These loans were not just about money, they were about ensuring loyalty and maintaining control over the global financial system. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union sought to exert its influence by offering loans and military aid to socialist and communist movements around the world. Through secret financial deals, the USSR provided resources to movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, hoping to tip the balance of power in its favor. These loans were often structured in ways that kept countries dependent on Soviet aid, creating a web of financial obligations that extended the USSR's political reach. These financial maneuvers were key to the Cold War, as they allowed both superpowers to influence the internal politics of countries without directly engaging in military conflict. Proxy wars were not just fought with soldiers. They were fought with dollars and rubles, and these financial deals often determined the outcome of conflicts. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cold War finance was the secrecy behind many of these financial pacts. While the military and political actions of the superpowers were often public and heavily scrutinized, the financial deals that shaped the course of the Cold War were far more opaque. Governments made covert agreements, often with little to no public knowledge, and these deals had far-reaching consequences. For instance, the petrodollar system, one of the most influential financial pacts of the Cold War, was a secret for many years. The U.S. government never fully disclosed the terms of its agreements with Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing nations. This was not by accident. Keeping the deal secret allowed the U.S. to maintain its control over global finance without facing international backlash or scrutiny. Similarly, the financial arrangements made by the Soviet Union and China were often hidden from public view. The USSR, in particular, sought to operate outside of Western-dominated financial systems, but its deals with client states in the global south were kept under wraps, allowing Moscow to extend its influence while avoiding the public eye. The Cold War wasn't just a clash of ideologies, it was also a financial war. Secret financial pacts, hidden loans, and economic strategies played a pivotal role in shaping the global order. While the military and political battles were front and center, the financial wars fought behind closed doors were just as crucial in determining the outcome of the Cold War. In Part 2, we will dive deeper into the collapse of the Cold War financial system, the end of secret pacts, and how the global financial system transformed after the fall of the USSR. Stay tuned for how these hidden financial deals continue to shape today's economic landscape. The end of the Cold War marked not only a political and military shift, but also a seismic transformation in the global financial system. As the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the world's ideological battle between communism and capitalism came to a head. The end of this era, however, didn't just represent the victory of Western ideals but also signaled the unraveling of many of the secret financial pacts that had governed global economics for decades. The Soviet Union's collapse was a result of numerous factors: political corruption, economic inefficiency, and the pressure of maintaining an enormous military-industrial complex. However, the economic model that the USSR had built based on central planning and a self-contained financial system was unsustainable in a rapidly changing world. The Cold War-era financial networks that the Soviet Union had constructed began to collapse under the weight of global financial pressure. For years, the USSR had sought to create a financial world independent of the Bretton Woods system. The Soviet-controlled financial networks, such as Comecon, had served as a financial lifeline for communist and socialist countries. However, these pacts were unable to weather the financial storms of the 1980s. And as the Soviet economy crumbled, so too did these hidden financial agreements. The USSR's economic model was so centralized and controlled that it lacked the flexibility needed to adapt to changing global conditions. The collapse of these financial systems marked the end of the Soviet Union's influence in the global financial arena. In parallel with the Soviet collapse, the petrodollar system, one of the most significant financial pacts born from Cold War geopolitics, faced new challenges. The petrodollar system, designed to ensure the global dominance of the US dollar, was primarily maintained by the strategic oil deals made between the United States and oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia. But by the late 20th century, changes in global oil markets began to put this system under strain. The US's position as the world's financial superpower was deeply tied to its control of the global oil market. The US dollar was linked to the price of oil, which meant that for every barrel of oil traded, there was an implicit demand for dollars. This system helped keep the US dollar at the center of the global economy, strengthening the US's financial and political power. But as oil-producing nations started diversifying their economies and looking for alternatives, the system began to show signs of instability. In 1971, President Nixon took the US off the gold standard, severing the final connection between the dollar and gold. This move, while initially causing global concern, ultimately solidified the petrodollar system. But by the late 1980s and 1990s, emerging economies, especially in Asia, started trading oil and other commodities in currencies other than the US dollar, such as the euro and the Japanese yen. Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, began to explore new ways of managing its vast energy resources, and China started looking at ways to internationalize its currency, the yuan. While the petrodollar system still remains a crucial part of the global financial system, the seeds of its eventual decline were planted in the post-Cold War period. The rise of new financial centers, such as China, and the increasing importance of emerging markets signaled that the global financial order was shifting away from the US-centric model of the Cold War. While the collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of one Cold War financial system, the rise of China as a global economic power heralded the beginning of a new financial landscape. After decades of isolation, China began to open up its economy in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping's reforms. By the 1990s, China had integrated itself into the global economy, becoming a key player in international trade and finance. China's growing influence was not just about cheap labor and manufacturing. The nation began to make strategic financial moves that would challenge the US-dominated financial system. One of China's primary strategies was the gradual internationalization of the yuan, also known as the renminbi, its national currency. While the yuan was initially tightly controlled by the Chinese government, the country's rapidly expanding economy demanded a larger role in global finance. By the 2000s, China was increasingly using its currency in trade agreements with countries around the world. In addition, China became a major creditor to many nations, especially in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Through financial arrangements and loans, China created its own network of economic influence, providing capital and infrastructure development while simultaneously exerting soft power. These financial ties were not just about money. They were also about creating political alliances, securing access to resources, and challenging US influence in the global south. China's economic rise was also accompanied by the growing importance of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SECO, a political, economic, and security alliance that included Russia, Central Asian countries, and increasingly, China. The SCO, while not a direct challenge to the Bretton Woods system, signified the growing importance of non-Western financial institutions and trade networks. These institutions would eventually become part of a multipolar world where financial power was no longer centered solely in the West. As the Cold War came to an end and the world embraced a more interconnected and globalized economy, the financial pacts that defined the Cold War era did not disappear. Instead, they evolved and adapted to the new realities of the post-Cold War world. The petrodollar system, for example, remains an important feature of the global economy, but its influence has waned as new economic players have emerged. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the global financial system became more complex and decentralized. The rise of emerging economies, the advent of new financial technologies, and the increasing importance of global trade have all contributed to the shift away from a U.S.-dominated financial system. While the U.S. dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency, countries like China, Japan, and the European Union have worked to create alternatives to U.S.-led financial institutions. This has led to the development of new financial systems, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank (AIIB), which challenges the World Bank's dominance, and China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), which seeks to build trade networks across the globe. Furthermore, the globalization of financial markets and the rise of digital currencies and blockchain technology are set to challenge traditional financial systems in ways that were unimaginable during the Cold War. These new technologies allow for decentralized financial transactions that bypass traditional financial institutions, including central banks, and open the door to a more multipolar financial world. The financial systems of the Cold War are increasingly irrelevant in today's world. As we move into the 21st century, financial power is being distributed across multiple centers. China, India, the European Union, and other emerging economies are becoming key players in global finance, challenging the U.S.'s monopoly over financial institutions and currency markets. China's push to internationalize the yuan and its investments in infrastructure and technology are key aspects of this new era of financial power. The Belt and Road Initiative, for example, has already built strong financial and economic links between China and dozens of countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Through loans, trade deals, and infrastructure development, China is creating an economic sphere of influence that rivals the U.S.'s historical dominance. Similarly, India's rapid economic growth and its role in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, bloc are adding new dimensions to the global financial order. India, with its vast population and growing middle class, is expected to play an increasingly important role in global finance, particularly in sectors like technology, energy, and agriculture. The emergence of regional trading blocs and the rise of new financial technologies will only accelerate this shift toward a more decentralized global financial system. While the U.S. dollar remains dominant, it faces increasing competition from other currencies, such as the Chinese yuan and the euro, as well as the rise of digital currencies like Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. These new financial tools promise to transform the way nations conduct transactions, trade, and finance projects on a global scale. The Cold War was not just a battle of military might and political ideologies. It was also a financial war fought through secret pacts, economic alliances, and covert financial agreements. These financial systems, though often invisible to the public, shaped the course of history and created a world where the financial systems of the U.S. and the Soviet Union were in direct opposition. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of China, and the continued dominance of the petrodollar system have all been crucial moments in the evolution of global finance. The financial landscape of today is vastly different from the world of the Cold War, but the legacy of those secret pacts still lingers in the global economy. As we move toward a more multipolar financial world, the impact of Cold War financial systems remains evident in the way nations interact, trade, and engage with each other economically. The Cold War's financial legacy will continue to influence the global economy for years to come, as new financial players emerge and the old systems give way to new technologies and alliances. The story of Cold War finance is far from over. It is an ongoing saga of economic power, shifting alliances, and the ever-changing dynamics of global finance.